So this talk is not really about Magento or building apps. This is more like crystal meth and Daft Punk and kind of PHP-inspired rant about building things. I hope you like it. Also, this is not coffee. So, let's start with this. I was flying somewhere. I think I was in one of the airports in Germany. And I'm standing in a line to board the plane. And as I'm standing there, obviously the line gets shorter and shorter. And as I almost got to the gate, I pull out my iPhone, open the KLM app, one of the Dutch airlines app, to see my boarding pass. And so I try to open it, and it's not here. So I go to the gate, and the girl is like, "Can you present your boarding pass?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't have it." So she's like, how exactly did you get here? I'm like, well, as I was standing at the security desk, it was working fine. Actually, the button boarding pass was in the app. But once I got to the boarding gate, it was gone. So she's like, well, show me the app, I'll show you how it's done. I was like, sure, teach me more. So she's trying to find the boarding pass, it's not here, so eventually she takes a paper boarding pass and writes down, I guess, my name, my details, my seat, all the details I need to actually board a plane. Eventually I go to the plane, it's all fine. So as I'm flying, I'm thinking, that's really dumb. Like how an app which had my boarding pass kind of lost it. So a couple of weeks, I guess I keep flying and I keep going to different airports and trying that app. Eventually, through I guess trial and error, I figured out that it starts showing your boarding pass button 2 hours before a flight, and then stop showing it at the time of a flight. So throughout the time, like, you had one job to make it right. For example, what if my flight is delayed? The boarding pass just disappears. What if I'm early at the airport and I need to go through security? I can't open my boarding pass. So the only purpose of that app was to either search for flights, which sometimes people do. You can either check in for a flight, which I tend to do if I can't go to my laptop, so I would check in to my flight on my phone. I do it so it's faster and easier for me as opposed to going to an airport, standing in a line. And then obviously the most important thing is I show up at an airport, pull out my app. I don't have to go to the check-in desk. I just put my app on the screen. It scans it. It's done. I'm allowed to fly. So the only purpose of that app really was to allow me to faster get to flying. And it failed to do that job. It only had one job to do. So I was thinking about this, like, we're trying to build all these apps, we're trying to build all these websites and services, but we sometimes seem to be missing what is the actual core thing we're trying to fix. What is the core problem we're trying to build? And most times, it's either to do something faster, cheaper, or easier. Like for me, doing anything online, I prefer that. As opposed to going to a store, buying something, I would just rather do it online. So for e-commerce site, obviously I want to buy something. But if I have an app which shows me my boarding pass, it better fucking work. I'm sorry. No, I'm not really sorry. I actually checked with organizers. Apparently it's allowed to swear. It's really cool. Free country, I guess. And I had another example. It's an app called Tripit, which is a kind of a travel organizing app. And it shows all your flights, all your hotels, puts everything in one spot. So as I'm flying here, it says, oh, by the way, you're flying to PHP UK. These are all the details you need. It's really, really cool. The problem that app has is that every time you open it up, and if it wasn't started before, so if the iPhone just killed the app, every time you open it, it decides to refresh the data, which is fine. So it tries to keep up to date. What happens if I'm offline? It can't refresh the data and just keeps spinning forever. So again, I have an app which tries to show me all these things, and the moment my internet breaks, it stops working. If I'm on a flight, it doesn't work. If I'm underground, it doesn't work. Again, the simple apps trying to do something good for me just break so quickly. So for this talk, I was thinking, I started writing PHP. To be honest, really, I started writing PHP because I went to a forum online, and this guy was like, I'm going to pay, I think it was like 50 quid for someone who's going to build me an app. I'm like, I'm going to build you an app. And he is, yes, you should build me an app. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn PHP now because I don't know how to build apps. So I learned PHP, and it was pretty cool, and I started doing all these different things. But today I realize that if you look at all these startups, if you look at all these companies, most of them are PHP. I think it's absolutely fucking amazing that we went from a language which used to be this thing everyone could easily pick up. It used to be a thing everyone just picks up as a kid and starts learning it, and it's easy to build websites, to a language now which people can use to build billion-dollar companies. I think that's just insane. For me, it breaks my mind. So everyone in this room can be building something which 5 years from now, Facebook is going to buy for $16 billion. I think it's amazing. And that's why I decided to talk about this, is that everyone in this room has the capacity and I guess the drive to build things. And it doesn't really matter if it's a client application or a startup you're building or a side project you're building or an open source project you're building. You're building something. And that by itself is amazing. But at the same time, I've seen so many startups and so many projects fail to deliver. So I thought I'd share some stories, some things I've done before to maybe help you build things which actually work. Because there's nothing more frustrating than spending hours and months and weeks building something and then figuring out no one actually needs that. It sucks. So a while ago, I found this app. It's built by BMW, and great company, a German company. There's a BMW app, and you pull it out, and the only thing it does, it unlocks your car. So first of all, I was like, this is just stupid. Why would I ever need to unlock my car with my phone? And they're like, oh, it's actually pretty cool. You just pull out your app and you unlock it. I'm like, I just pull out my key, press unlock, and it unlocks. What the app actually solves? And they're like, oh, but it's like new technologies and things. So the app itself goes to a cloud, comes back to the car, and unlocks it. I'm like, what if I have gloves on? What if I can't remember my key code? What if I'm drunk? Oh, wait, I guess you shouldn't be driving if you're drunk anyway. But with most of the modern cars, you just have a key in your pocket. You show up at a car, and it just unlocks itself because it detects you. So the app itself tries to fix a problem which doesn't exist. So they spend God knows how much money, how much time, how developers spend all this time trying to build something, trying to fix a problem which doesn't exist. And the app obviously fails at some point because no one actually needs that. So come up with a list of if you actually try to build something, what you should look for. The first thing is what you're building is trying to remove some barrier. For example, if you're building a taxi app like Halo or Uber, the barrier for that is that if you leave a pub in a peak time, it's very hard to get a cab because everyone wants to have one. So if you have an app, you do that before you actually leave a place, and then once a cab arrives, you leave a place, you have a cab. So it solves a very cool problem of finding a cab in a busy time. But the problem is sometimes people are adopted to existing technologies, so they can't just take on what you're building. During Christmas, me and my friend were driving in a cab back home in Lithuania, and he's like, oh, actually this cab company accepts Bitcoin as a payment. I was like, this is amazing. I was so happy for an hour. This is amazing, you can pay by Bitcoin. So we're driving a cab and we're like, okay, we're gonna stop and now we're gonna pay with Bitcoin. 5 minutes later, we finally paid with Bitcoin. Because both my friend and the cab driver have no idea how to use any of the apps. So it's them trying to figure out how to pay, and they're scanning things and QR codes everywhere. And I'm like, people are used to paying with cash. It's very, very simple. So if you're using a technology like Bitcoin for payments, you better make sure that it replaces something which exists now in a way which doesn't require more work. Because people are already used to somewhat bad currency as cash. Another thing is sometimes some of these existing solutions need to change for your idea to get adopted. Again, if we go back to taxi apps, most of them were illegal in the US for a while because a taxi as a service is pretty well defined, and there are different rules and laws, and you can't just build whatever you want. So it took them quite a while, months, to talk to the government and eventually allow your app to be active. So again, sometimes you build something and there's something you need to replace first for your app to become viable. And the last thing is, most of the apps we all do are trying to make someone's lives easier. So if you're building a business app, it replaces something for them, so we don't have to have staff doing something by hand. What a lot of people don't realize is that it's really not that good for a lot of people when you replace them with apps. I would love to replace everyone with apps, but you're replacing someone's job, so you're going to make someone unemployed, and that's not really good. So what you have to realize that sometimes as you're introducing technologies, there's going to be people fighting the change. Again, if you're building a taxi app, the call service is going to be like, oh, you're going to replace it with an app, we're going to fight this as much as we can. If you're building an invoice app, accounting is going to say, please don't, we would like to stay here as a job. So that's why you have to look at these things. But most importantly, and this is a quote from Paul Graham, a guy from Y Combinator. So instead of copying Facebook, and instead of saying, oh, I'm going to build a better Facebook, I'm going to build a better Twitter, I'm going to build a faster something, I'm going to be a cheaper something, you should think about things and try to do them from a completely different angle. Instead of trying to copy something, instead of trying to improve on something which already exists, try to envision things from a completely different angle. For me, probably the best example of that is Snapchat. I'm not really a user of Snapchat. I don't like to send naked pictures of myself that often. Okay, I've done it once. So I installed app Snapchat. I'm looking at it. It's a pretty design. It works to send messages, but it looks extremely simple. The app itself just allows you to send messages. But the difference is it doesn't store anything. So you can have a conversation with someone without a trace be left anywhere. And for everyone else, we were like, oh, this is stupid. Email stores everything, Facebook messages are all there. But the Snapchat founders figured out, wait a second, no one actually wants that. Or not no one, but most people would like to talk and no trace would be left. So they looked at the communication, they looked at texting from a completely different angle and figured out how to build a solution which solves that. And all of a sudden, they're big and popular. So that's a good example of trying to look at something from a different angle. I think I was 17 years old, and I was living back in Lithuania, where I was from. And my friend calls me, and he's like, maybe we should build a books e-commerce store. And at that time, like, e-commerce was pretty much non-existent. There was a few stores, but no one used them because it was just too difficult. It was just not a good customer experience. You would buy things and they would take weeks to ship, so it was just not a good experience. So he was like, well, do you think we should improve that? I'm like, I'm young and dumb. I'm like, sure, let's do it. So we spent then 6 months building an e-commerce site. And we built everything from the front-end side, from the back-end side, to the invoicing, warehouse management, payment providers. Like, we didn't even use PayPal. We just wrote everything from scratch ourselves. Spent months and months. So eventually we built that. And so we launched this store, and we can't actually even ship anything because we can't afford anything. So we drive things ourselves. So we had our own apartments filled with books. Everywhere we look, it's all books. And we just take them in the car and ship them. So we're doing these for months and months. And obviously, the inventory is growing all the time. So there's more and more books coming. And eventually, I think we got up to like 10,000 books, which at that time seemed amazing. A huge number, 10,000 books. A lot. And we're starting to do like 50 orders a day. It's a big number. We were really happy. Like, we went from having nothing to a pretty big e-commerce store. And so all the time, as we are doing this, I'm thinking, how do we actually optimize this? Because right now we have 10,000 books, and we have some people who look over books, and we're trying to find them, trying to pull the best books out and try to sell them. How do we scale this to be able to sell 1 million books? And as I'm thinking about it, I'm realizing, well, we can hire, I don't know, 1,000 people, but that's not really scalable. We can try to predict what books we should sell. I was like, wait a second, that's actually a pretty cool idea. So how about instead of looking at our books as actual listings, how about we just say to an algorithm, find us the best books, which is going to make us the most amount of money. And at that time, terms like big data and data science, we haven't even heard of it. So we're like, okay, let's try to build that. So we're starting building all these tools. We built scrapers to scrape our websites. We're collecting all this data. We're looking at this. And as we start to build this, I'm like, this actually works. It's really, really cool. So Big data now comes around. And everywhere you look now, everyone's saying, oh, we are big data. We are building all these things. And the question I have to everyone all the time is like, do you actually use your data for anything? Because what a lot of people bragging about data miss is that if you don't use data as a resource, you're just wasting money collecting unusable bits. So that's the first thing we kind of learned when building e-commerce store is that if you have data, but you're not actually using it for anything, it's useless. So then we started building all these tools, all these analysis, all these reports, all these graphs, all these different pieces of technology, trying to look at our data from all these different angles, trying to come up with solutions. And then I came to this conclusion is that there are a few things you need to have to make sure whatever data tool you're building actually works. Obviously, the first one is there a problem you're trying to answer? Which in most cases, data can answer a lot of the questions. So for example, what are the top items in our store? You look at that, it's a very easy query, you run that, you get a result, boom, it works. But if you build some kind of a tool, like what are the best 5 items in our store, who is actually going to use that tool? In most cases, that's your staff. If you're building some kind of an app, it's probably going to be some user using it for something. But then comes the tricky bit. What sort of decisions are we going to do based on the data or based on the tool you just did? And most of the companies fail to deliver that. And why? Because if I send you a report by email about saying, oh, these are your 1,000 best products, what sort of decision I can make for that? Not a lot. And that's the most important thing we realize when building any sort of data-related tool is that if you don't allow people to make decisions from it, or the people making decisions are not actually understanding your data, your tool is pretty much useless. And what most startups fail is that table is not an interface. Every time, like, for example, again, Magento, every time I log into Magento and go to orders report, I see a list of my top 1,000 orders. So what? What should I use it for? It's useless. Why is it useless? Because as a user, you're asking me to process every single row, to figure out the things I'm looking for, to figure out what questions I should be having, and then do something about it. Why? Like, I'm too dumb for this. So a table is never an interface. So instead of an e-commerce solution having 1,000 order list of something, build something which tells me, you know what, your top 5 items are these, your profit margin today is this, and these are the 5 items that you're going to run out of stock very, very soon. So I went from having raw data, which is for humans kind of incomprehensible, to having an app which tells me my next actions, which tells me answers to questions I haven't needed an answer for. So every time I look at business tools and I look at various apps which are trying to help me, I'm like, what are you telling me? Please tell me something. Even if I look at apps like Foursquare, which allows me to check in, but when I'm looking at Foursquare is, please tell me the best spots in New York. Can it do it? Not really, because it tries to focus on having just a list of things. I don't like lists. It takes me time to go for everything. I want something to tell me what to do next. And once you do that, once you build apps, which instead of presenting with raw data gives me answers, gives me solutions to problems, it becomes so usable. And that's why it's so important to think about scalability, not in terms necessarily as a technology problem, but does your idea actually scale? Again, if you have a table, once you have 100 items, everything is very simple, your interface is very easy to use, you can look at things very easily. What happens when you scale up to having 1 million of something, 1 million products, 1 million orders? The app you just built doesn't work anymore. What do you do next? And that becomes a problem, is how do you scale your ideas? How do you scale your solutions? That's why every time I'm building something, I'm thinking how we can do this in a way where the data size is irrelevant. That's why if your app is providing solutions, that's why if your app is providing suggestions, it doesn't matter how much data is behind that, it always gives you something. And that's the important thing about data, and that's the important thing is about any data tool you build is that how you can do it so the data size doesn't matter. So you can scale your app, you can scale your solution beyond what's already in the app. And that's very, very cool. And most importantly, I hate checkboxes so much. I think, I honestly think it's the worst UI element ever invented is a checkbox. Because every time you have an app or any sort of solution, you're like, oh, the app can go to the left or to the right, let's add a checkbox. Keep adding checkboxes for more things. I can pick things on one. Again, what happens if you have a pretty well-used app where there are 1,000 things you need to check all these checkboxes for? Who's going to do that? Another thing is, what happens when all these checkboxes are checked? Who's going to remember why they checked them? That's the biggest problem in, for example, Facebook privacy settings, is that there are so many checkboxes, and once you check them, you don't really remember what you checked, that you don't really know what your privacy is. Then they had to build all these tools to kind of preview what your privacy settings are, because all these checkboxes are not really telling the user what they've just selected. Most importantly, I was taking a cab, I think 2 days ago here in London, to the bar, and the guy's like, oh, so which way do you want to go? I'm like, I don't know, I don't live here. Don't ask me these sort of questions. I don't know. It's pretty much your job. Please take me there. And it's the same happens to your users as they're using your application. Is every time you have a checkbox, you're asking your user to make a decision, but what if they're not in a position to make those decisions? What if they don't know the answer? They're just going to randomly check things and then just break things. And what we were building is that in most cases, we have so many checkboxes for so much different items like orders, data, products, they become unmanageable. And that's why we're always thinking when it comes to data is how do we drive those decisions? How do we pick left or right purely based on data? Because then your app becomes scalable beyond infinity, even when you have more and more data coming in. Even when you have more and more users using it, it doesn't matter. This startup came to me recently, and they were building an e-commerce charity website. So it's pretty much Amazon, but the only users using it would be charities. So you list your products on there, and the charities come there and they buy products from you. So it works exactly the same as in the same way as Amazon, just that it's specifically for charities, so you can have lower prices, and you're pretty much giving away things for them so they can buy them. And every time I'm thinking about that, I was like, you're asking me to use your service now, but I don't want to actually invest that much time because any additional service I introduce requires me to spend extra time. And I was like, can you build it in such a way that it wouldn't actually require us any time? So you built this cool idea, you built this cool startup. I would love to use it, but can we make it in such a way that it will be completely free for me in terms of how much time I have to invest into this? So we start talking into it, and what I realized is that every time you introduce an app, every time you introduce a new technology for anyone, be it a user or anyone, how much extra work are they going to have to spend to use it? There's a concept in finance called opportunity cost, which is a kind of a financial representation of doing something and not doing something else. And the cost of not doing something else is called opportunity cost. So as you're introducing tools, which we can use it, which I can use myself, when I'm using that tool, I'm spending my time not doing something else. So every time I want to use something, I want to make sure that it doesn't actually require extra work from me. Because if it requires extra work from me, the tool becomes useless because the investment is just too high. This great guy, Jack Dorsey, he's a founder of Twitter and founder of Square, mobile payments app. He said that all the interesting things happening online right now, everything is always connected. So instead of Instagram being a photo app, which it really is, Instagram just takes photos which already exist, takes filters, and takes the social, connects them, and comes up with the one final solution being Instagram. So all the cool startups right now are all about connecting. So once a user comes to start Instagram, there's not really that much extra effort he has to put in to use it. Every time someone comes to me and they're like, oh, do you like to use our invoicing app? I'm like, yes, but like I can't go and start doing extra work just to use your app. Your app needs to connect to whatever I'm using right now. And that's why anything you're building, anything you're doing is always API first. Because nowadays, people have solutions for everything. If you're an e-commerce store, you have running Magento. If you're doing a CMS, you have some solution running. And I want every tool you introduce to me, I want to make sure it connects to your tool. I want to make sure it doesn't require extra work. So the data is always going back and forward. And that's why most of the successful tools are always API-based, because then I can use existing systems and just offload some pieces of data to your app, then it crunches through that, comes up with a solution, and I can use that. It's very, very cool. So these were all about tools. And now let's talk about real examples. I used to be friends with Microsoft. Not anymore. So a while ago, a couple of years ago, they had this cloud called Azure. It's pretty much what Amazon is or what Rackspace is, just built by Microsoft. The problem they had, it was extremely hard to use, like really, really hard to use. And if you tried to deploy a PHP app, you had to bundle your PHP executable. It was just a mess. So as I'm sitting home, I'm like, we could actually fix this. How about we make Azure a very, very simple tool? How about we make it so if I try to deploy my app as a developer, as a PHP developer, I just drop in some files into it and just pick some up, and it works as PHP should be working. So I sit down and start prototyping things and start building an app. And it starts working really great. So I write an email to Microsoft saying, hello, I built a service on top of your service. What do you think about it? They're like, yeah, your service is called Azure Plus. It's probably illegal. So they ended up not suing me. So we started having calls with them. And they're looking at my app, and it's very, very simple. You just create your application, you create a zip archive to it, you upload it on my website, it deploys it to a cloud, provision some instances, provision databases, everything works, everything is very pretty. So as I'm talking to Microsoft and I'm showing to them what I've built, they're like, this is pretty cool, this is pretty nice, like show us more, and I'm having Skype calls and I'm showing demos, and I started going to conferences, and I was like, oh, this is what I built. Eventually they're like, maybe you want to come to Microsoft in Redmond, that's their office. Maybe you want to come and show it to some of our engineers. So I fly to Redmond. Long flight, and I'm jet lagged, I got there. And so they had this Azure conference happening for apparently like invited people. So I'm glad, I'm invited, I'm there, I'm speaking. And the first talk they have was by Scott Guthrie, this Microsoft, I think, VP of Cloud or something. And they're like, hello everyone, we built this tool. And I'm like, this looks exactly what I've built. So apparently, they come up with their own solution to whatever problem I was solving. So I'm devastated. I'm like, I spent all this time trying to build something, and Microsoft just came up with exactly the same tool. I'm like, this is horrible. So, but most importantly is that actually the app I built didn't work at all. But the way I've done it, it would trick people to assume it actually works. So every time you go and you create a database, it doesn't actually create a database. I created a database. So as I'm having a Skype call, and I'm like, oh, let's provision a database. I'm like, so they can't actually see me. I'm like, oh, I don't have a webcam. Let's not use a webcam. So as we're having all these calls, I'm actually like jumping from one keyboard to another, provisioning things by hand, because I couldn't be bothered to actually implement anything. So I built this app, it works. And so for all these demos, actually, like I didn't actually implement anything in that app apart from provisioning side. Everything was just tricked. So for example, every time I would deploy a sample app, guess what? I already had the sample app deployed somewhere else. So I'm like, oh, it's already deployed in 5 seconds. It would take like half an hour actually, but I was like, oh, this is already here. And that's really important, is that every time you build something, you have to have a prototype which tricks everyone in assuming you have it working. The problem I see a lot is that people would come, for example, to their boss and be like, oh, I think we have to have these 5 metrics, and once we add them, we're going to increase our sales 10 times. Most people would be like, yeah, that doesn't sound right. I don't think we should do this. Well, instead, you'd be like, oh, actually, I spent this weekend, I added these 2 things, and now if we just add the last thing, everything is going to be amazing. Users are going to be happier. And when you do that, and it works, and then people trust you, is that every time you build something, it doesn't matter if it's a client project or a startup, think about how you can make a prototype which works, so as you present it to people, they can actually understand what you're building. They can actually understand it and see it and play with it. Because a lot of people get excited about ideas alone. So you're like, oh, I'm going to build this tool, it's going to do this and that, and I'm going to process all this data, I'm going to build all these tables. But people are like, yeah, but like, show me this. And most people would say, oh, like, you haven't actually built this, so you're an idiot, you can't actually build anything. Well, at least they say it to me. But if only you could show them an actual real thing. Instead of saying, oh, I'm going to do this, just fucking do it and show them what you just did. Then people are like, oh, it's actually pretty cool. It works. I can play with it. I can see what it does. It's very, very nice. But most importantly, you have to focus. And so I've built a few different things, and I've seen many, many other people do different things. The most important thing is you have to focus on what you're building. So you have this great idea. I'm going to do a payments provider. Your core thing to do is to make sure payments work. Whatever interfaces you're going to build, whatever graphs you're going to do, none of it actually matters until the payment service works. And even a lot of open source projects get sidetracked trying to build these unnecessary extra services, extra tools, without actually delivering on a core part of an application. So it's extremely important to focus on what you're building. It's extremely important to pick a few things, do them right, and then move on to do different things. So for example, as you're building prototypes, you pick the most important 3 features, you build them, I guess you fake everything else, and the app works, everything functions. You can build it in a week. It's nice, it's pretty, it works. But once you lose focus, once you start doing all these extra things, then everything just breaks and it falls apart. Again, another quote from Jack Dorsey is that all the good products nowadays, or all the good inventors of everything, usually pick a few core features, and they do them right. And they're obsessed about perfection, but it's all about to a limited scope. Again, if you look at Snapchat, it really only does messaging. You can't, even for messaging, you have to send a picture. You can't actually just send text, which sounds stupid. It's like, why can't you send text? It's about focus. It's about figuring out the core principles of an app. So as we're talking about building things and talking about startups, a lot of people get excited about the idea to build $1 billion app. A lot of people are excited about the idea, I have this great technology, I want to build it, I want to launch it for everyone else to use, and then once they do any of this, no one is really interested. No one's actually buying your idea. And why that happens? Because the only way you can actually build something, the only way you can get everyone else to use whatever you're building, if you actually solve real problems, not made up ones. Not go to an art industry and say, you're going to build an e-commerce site to build art. I'm pretty sure you don't even know how art works. You can't just go to a random industry and try to solve problems for them and expect people to use them. I was, a couple of weeks ago, I guess removed my jacket. I was like, I'm going to work as a shipper for a couple of days. I'm going to learn how warehousing works. So I went to warehouse. Funny enough, everyone was like, oh, did you get fired or something? I'm like, no, I want to experience warehousing. So I went to warehouse, and I'm shipping things, and I'm scanning all the barcodes, and packing things, and I'm shipping them off. And all the time I'm thinking, I could actually introduce a lot of these technologies, but all what they're going to do is probably add extra work for everyone in that work. Because the shipping is all about taking a product, I guess scanning it into some system, which then tells them what to do next, and you put the box out. So whatever problem you see to solve, it has to make sure it just either improves the shipper's performance or makes it easier. Solving a problem like increasing the quality of shipping, there's no problem like that. So you have to realize as you're building things, what is the actual core problem you're trying to solve. So recently, WhatsApp, I think yesterday, got bought by Facebook, by a huge amount of money. And then was like, oh, why did they get so popular? Because they had, I think, 400 million users for an app, which is a lot. What we figured, what the app creators figured, is they actually have to reach the right customers. So they were one of the first, I guess, startups nowadays to build a Java app for all the dumb phones, which nowadays you'd be like, why would I do this? Who's going to use a dumb phone? Pretty much most of the world. So except from US and UK and all the rich countries like that, Africa and Asia are really huge into just old Nokias and all the old phones. All of them are in Java. So you have to build a Java app. So WhatsApp built all of them, and all of a sudden, huge parts of the world became users of that app. I was in Spain a while ago, And my friend's like, are you on WhatsApp? I'm like, I don't even know what it is. She's like, oh, in Spain, text messaging is expensive enough, and I can't really get a good enough plan that everyone's on WhatsApp because I just pay for data, and data is cheaper, way more cheaper in Spain than text messaging. And it wouldn't even click in my head. I was like, that makes no sense. And apparently it is. It's the truth. It's all about figuring out how do you reach your right customer, how to reach the people you're trying to build. Every time I pull up a website in some hotel with a shitty connection, and it takes forever to load, or every time I go to Facebook and it starts playing videos automatically, I'm like, you do know that only works for less than 1% of the world, because everywhere else, the internet is too slow. Everywhere else, it just can't load all these assets. So you're building something which doesn't actually reach the population. It tries to segregate users. It tries to pick only the users with fast internet connections. That's horrible. Every time I go to a hotel and I can't open the website because the SSL connection is not good enough, so it keeps dropping packets and the assets don't load. I'm like, just don't have so much things on the website. You try to figure out how you can achieve the reach of your app with a smaller user base. I like sports. But most importantly, as you're building anything, think about it as a sport. So as I was sitting in a Microsoft office, I'm like, oh, this is just my thing I spent a couple months building. It failed, but I was like, oh, it's actually not too bad. I learned something. I learned how to build things. I learned how to take it from an idea to an actual implementation and how to get people to listen to that. That's really cool. So as you're building technology to solve some problems, you realize that in most of the time, it's probably not going to work. In most of the time, whatever you build, people are going to look at that and be like, yeah, you tried to build something, it doesn't work. It doesn't really work. And you should be like, yeah, fine, I'm going to build something else. Because most of the successful inventors, most of the successful people who build things, they're always trying to find new ideas, right? To build more things and keep building them as a sport. You fail and you build again, and eventually it starts going to click. So as a finishing example, and the best example I have, anyone has heard of his name before? Amazing. He's American. I'm not judging you. So there's this guy, Carl Fisher. I think he was born in late 80s. And he had a horrible eyesight. So he's sitting in a classroom. He can't really see the blackboard, so he eventually gets moved to the back of the classroom because his teacher is like, you can't learn anything, you're a moron. Leave. So eventually he sits there and I'm like, I can't actually learn anything, so maybe I should just quit school. So he does. And he's like, well, obviously, as you quit school, you have to come up with ways to make money. So he's like, I'm going to sell candy. So he buys some candy and starts selling it. But he was an incredibly clever marketer. So instead of just selling candy, so he buys from somewhere a huge print of a naked lady, puts it on his chest, and covers it with his robe. And then he goes to a train, and as he walks past all these businessmen traveling somewhere, he walks past them and just flips it up, shows it for a second, and then moves on. And they're like, whoa, wait, stop, kid, what are you doing? So they come back, and they're like, oh, please show us more. He's like, if you buy the candy, I'll show you more. And we start buying all this candy, and starts making all this money. Huge startup, works great. And then he's like, oh, bicycles. Everyone wants to have a bicycle. I should open a bicycle store. So him and his brothers built a bicycle store. No one is buying bicycles. No one needs a bicycle. He's like, how do I get people to buy bicycles? He takes a rope, climbs up to the tallest building, connects the rope from one building to another, gets a stunt, I guess, driver, and he just drives around on the rope, on the top of all these buildings. Everyone's like, this is amazing. Everyone starts buying bicycles. He's like, oh, this is pretty cool. I think eventually he flies to Minneapolis, one of the big cities in the US. He takes an air balloon. Sorry, that's wrong. I missed a part. So eventually he starts selling bicycles. That's pretty cool. He's like, oh, he sees a car driving. He's like, oh, maybe I should start selling cars. And he's blind as a bat. So he buys a car anyway. He drives it as fast, as the speed, the agility. It's amazing. I want to buy one. Buys a car. He's like, maybe I should start selling cars. So he opens up a car sales place, one of the first car dealerships in the US. He starts selling all these cars. People are buying cars, and he's like, I'm pretty sure eventually people are going to want to drive these cars at night. So he invents a headlamp. He builds a headlamp, he's selling them, it's running great. Eventually, he decides to open a store in Minneapolis. So he goes to Minneapolis, gets a huge hot air balloon, hooks up a car to it, goes to the air, he's flying. He's a pretty girl on the street. So he's like, oh, stop, let's go down. So he comes to her, he starts talking. And the girl is like, why do you keep building all these things? Like, you have so much money by this point. Why do you keep building? And he's like, oh, that's really the only thing I want in life. Is like, I want to build things. She's like, yeah, but like, let's get things started and let's do something. Let's travel, let's go on holidays. But he's like, no. I'm going to do one last thing. I'm going to do one last thing, and then it's going to be over. So as he's driving his car, he's like, oh, I'm pretty sure people would love to see them race, because he's seen people racing with cars anyway, because men, they like to go fast. So he's like, I'm going to build a racetrack. So he builds a dirt racetrack. And everyone's like, that has to be the dumbest thing you've ever done. Who's going to watch people go in circles on a dirt track? Americans. So, I'm sorry. So he built a track, and like 6 people die in the first race. It's just a complete disaster. He's like, oh, it's horrible. And he's already like charging $1, like $1, to see the race. And people come anyway, so he starts building that. Eventually, he builds a paved road, builds a paved track, and that's what Indy 500 is now, today. So he built Indy 500, one of the most famous races in the US. He starts doing that. And obviously, his now wife comes to him, and she's like, well, please come to a holiday with me. So they fly to Florida. And as we're walking around Florida, we see all these things, and there's a guy building a massive bridge. At that time, one of the longest and biggest bridges in the world. So he comes to the guy, and he's like, why are you building this bridge? He's like, oh, I like to build bridges. He's like, what's on the other side? He's like, oh, I don't even know, it's some swamps. So he's like, please take me there. So they take a car, go to the swamps. And he starts looking around, he goes to the ground and starts playing with some mud. He's like, I'm pretty sure I can backfill all this place. He's like, sure, I'll pay for a bridge, but I get the land, and I build anything I want there. So he does. So he starts backfilling all this land. Eventually, he fills it out. He builds casinos, he builds hotels. That's Miami today. So he builds Miami. No one comes. The whole place is empty. And by that point, he has quite a lot of money. But he built a huge, like Miami is one of the largest cities in the US now. No one comes. So he went to the Congress in Washington, D.C., and he has enough money by this point. He's like, let's build a highway from north to Miami. So they build a highway. No one comes. He's like, I have to do something. I put all my money into this, and no one is coming. I have to do something. And by this time, he's also pretty good friends with the president. So he invites the president to Miami. He takes a few photos, and then everyone starts noticing that. And then one person comes, 2 people come. Eventually, it's as insane as it is today in the internet world. All these people selling all the land, eventually everything gets bought. And so Miami is filled with people. It's flourishing, everything is, like, by this point, he has more money than he ever needs. But he's like, he wouldn't be himself. He's like, I'm going to try to build something else. So he decides to build the North Miami, which is pretty much on the east side of New York. There's an island, which is kind of referred to as the Miami of the North. He invests all of his money into that. And eventually, the markets crashed. Everything gets shut down. Everything is over. He can't finish it. So as he's almost passing away, these guys come to him, and they're like, we're going to take on a hot air balloon and fly over Miami, the city you built. As they're flying, he sees all these things, and it's amazing. It's a huge, flourishing city. Millions of people are living there. It's amazing. And eventually he passes away. And the point of his story, that everything he built, everything he tried to build, was never to make money. Like he didn't care. Every penny he made, he would always invest it back. It wasn't about trying to solve problems just for fake reasons. Everything he's done is he saw opportunities in the market. He saw gaps like headlamps. People are going to eventually want to drive at night. How are they going to do it? They can't see anything. He built a headlamp. For him, it was all about solving problems for people. For him, it was always about figuring out solutions and then making so everyone else sees them and then adopts them. Like Indy 500 by this point is probably one of the greatest races in US. And it started off from a dirt track and which people died every turn we made because it was just incredibly bad. And that's what I want to leave you guys with, is that everything you're building, everything you're going to learn in this conference, make sure you remember that it's all about trying to solve problems for people and trying to build things just because you want to. Thank you very much.